The key to really getting out of shame and humiliation is separating, understanding that your identity is separate from your actions or from the act person. So when you're feeling shame, when you're in that identity, it's the key to getting out of it is understanding who you are is not what you've done. That you are more than just your worst mistakes, that you are more than just the worst things that you've done, which is something I teach my women too, that it's really crucial for them to start moving forward is they have to learn how to separate their husband from what he's doing. Like it's very common for these women to be putting him all wrapped up and they start to question, do I really know who he is? He's not who I thought he was. And they start to wrap up who he is with what he's doing. So as I'm teaching them the shame cycle and what that means, that's when we are able to start breaking them into two different things.
Jolene, welcome back to the Superhuman Life.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a little bit of a scheduling struggle, but I'm so excited to come back and chat with you.
Yeah, me too. And it's funny. I always tell the guests, the ones that we have a lot of hurdles to jump through to make the conversation happen. These always turn out to be the best ones if there's had to been reschedules for whatever reason. So with all that in mind, I'm super fired up and really excited because I know we're going to get some value here for the audience today. For those that are new here and haven't checked out Jolene's first episode, we had her back almost a year ago, episode 124, which still to this day is one of our most downloaded episodes. I can't tell you between the audio, the video, the clips that we've made, it's been tens of thousands of views and downloads. So if you guys haven't done so yet, after today's conversation, I'll link it down in their show notes. Make sure to go check out the first episode that we had, which was episode 124. But Jolene, to kind of kick it off here today. Obviously, you work with women that are fighting and struggling through their husband's porn addiction, whether or not the men are doing anything about it. And that's what I love so much because you're empowering women to make changes in their life. This is probably not something you have a clear data point on, but in your opinion, how many women out there are aware of their husband's porn addiction, but they're not talking about it with them? Like they're kind of keeping it a secret.
The majority, I would say, I don't know. I would say, as far as I know, maybe you know more statistics on this than I do, but from what I've gathered, it's about 50% of men, of Christian men, who are struggling with pornography. Now, of those, I don't know how many of them have let their wives know. Um, so I'm unclear on that portion of it. Um, of the women who do know about it, very, very few talk about it. It's one of the biggest problems that I run into with these women, um, is that they don't talk about it. Their husband doesn't want to talk, even if they know about the problem, their husband doesn't want to talk about it because of all the shame that it brings up, right? And it's very difficult because it brings up a lot of emotion in the wife, and they don't know how to deal with that. And then they also don't talk about it, even if they're working with a professional. It's not something they talk to family members or friends about, again, because of the shame. A lot of the women have this thought that they don't want anybody to think badly of their spouse. They don't want their moms or their best friend to think badly of their husband. And so they just kind of stay silent, which is a huge problem because then it just perpetuates whatever emotional stuckness, is that a word? That's not a word, but like they stay stuck emotionally because they're not actually dealing with any of it. And they're also very, very isolated, which they don't realize is also part of the reason why they're not moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's right around 50% of Christian men. I want to stay on this topic here with the women that know and aren't talking about it. I've shared this a couple of times through my story. So I had an ex move in with me. It was the end of 2016. So this is before I really started on this path and journey that I was on. I was caught up in the addiction at this time in my life. It hadn't got into its worst point because that came in 2018. But I remember at the end of the relationship with this person, she had told me the minute she moved into the house, she felt change in me. And I can understand why that was happening because somebody was intruding now into my personal space. So when a woman is aware of the behavior, but not talking through it with the husband, what is that doing in terms of tension in the relationship in terms of the way that she sees the husband. Let's kind of talk through that a little bit if we can.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that you brought this up. So that is a huge problem, and I'll speak from my own experience as well. So my husband, when he came and talked to me, he confessed we'd been married about 5 or 6 years. When he came and he said, "Hey, P.S. I've been secretly addicted to porn this whole time," and then he followed it up with, "I don't need help. I'm going to overcome this on my own. I'm working through it, and I don't want to talk about it." And I was like, "Okay." I didn't really know where to go from there. So we weren't talking about it. So what that led to was a lot of it can lead to 2 things. One, I think you hit on that tension was super, super good, because it created a tension. I was like, "Okay, there's this thing that I'm concerned about, but I'm not allowed to talk to my husband about it." So, like, every 6 months or so, I would just kind of vaguely say, "Are you okay?" Then he would say, like, "Yes," or "No," or "I'm not doing great," and that was it. And so but there was this kind of just in the back of my mind, this kind of uneasiness of how is he doing? Is this something that I should be concerned about? I didn't have any details on it, so I didn't really know what it meant. I didn't know how often he was looking or what he was looking at or and it kind of just started to bring up all of my own insecurities of like, okay, is he thinking about it when we're together intimately? Is it something that he wishes he was watching even when he's with me, right? And it leads to all this insecurity anytime he was on his phone or on his laptop, even if he was studying for a test. Like I was just on kind of high alert. And it was just kind of a tension, very uneasy. And it made me want to pull back and not be vulnerable with him because I felt like he wasn't being as vulnerable with me, right? He just kind of like, hey, here's the thing that I'm struggling with. And kind of letting me in that way, but also excluding me by saying, I don't want to talk about it. We're not going to discuss this. So there is that tension, which is what I went to. But then there's also the other part, which so many women go to, which is then they kind of obsess. And they get maybe they put apps on the phone, or even if the husband doesn't do that, even if he doesn't have like Covenant Eyes or any kind of app that's monitoring what he's watching, they kind of obsess and they start to track how long is he gone, where is he going, what, and then they want to look at his phone all the time to see if he's texting people, and it kind of becomes this obsession where it shifts the nature of the relationship from equal partners to being more of like a comp or parole officer, someone who's monitoring behavior, almost like a parent, and it shifts the nature of the relationship. So you're no longer on a level playing field. One of you is above the other. That's as far as the wife goes. You think of yourself as above, right? As I'm the one that's right. And I have to like monitor from almost from a parent standpoint, right? Almost from I need to what is there's a word that I'm looking for that I can't think of, but like almost on a point where you say, I'm in charge and I want to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, no, I understand that a lot, and that's why we tell a lot of the men that are coming to us. Number one, if they've said, "Hey, I've assigned my wife as the accountability partner. She's got access to my covenant eyes." We quickly try to change that, right? Because, like you said, it's the woman's innate nature. Like it's a part of their being to kind of take on that nurturing mother type role. And if they see a wounded man, if they see a man that is struggling, they're instantly going to become mom, and they're going to look at him and begin to treat as like a little boy, right? I need to make sure that I monitor everything he's doing. Is he in bed at 9 o'clock? What's he getting up in the morning? What, all these things. And like that in of itself is, yeah, you may work through the addiction, but now you've created this dynamic between you and your wife where the relationship is no longer two partners together. It's now she's kind of positioned herself above you in a motherly type of role. And no man wants to be living in that.
Correct. Yeah, and it's not a healthy place for the woman either. This is something I think we hit this last time, but it's such a good point. So many women want to be the accountability partner, one because they want to be supportive, right? So if their husband's like, they're like, "All right, what how can I help you?" And they're like, "Okay, well, this would be really helpful. Can you be my accountability partner? I want you to be part of this." And it sounds really nice when you say it like that. However, what ends up happening is that it does tend to lead to this kind of obsession, right? The obsession on the woman's part. You almost become addicted to the addiction. You become addicted to wanting to know what's happening next, addicted to wanting to know every little detail. And there's the other part of that where your brain thinks, right, on the woman's side, thinks that you're going to feel better the more that you know. The more information I have, the better I'll feel, right? If I just knew what he was watching, if I just saw what it was, if I just knew how often it was happening or what sites he was doing, and if I just knew if he was telling the truth, just with empirical data, then it would make me feel better. But it never does, ever. So you just try and gather more and more and more information in order to try and solve what's going on internally, and that never works, which you know.
So what's the proper role then? I think we touched a little bit on it in the first episode, but as we're kind of having this conversation here, if we know that her role is not accountability partner support role, she doesn't need to have all the information. How much involved should the wife, spouse, girlfriend, partner be in the recovery?
It's a great question. I think that they just need to be as involved as you would with any other thing, right? The like let's say there were, an issue with a child that comes up. Like the way that you're involved as a partner is the same, right? You have conversations about it. You're open about it. Um I think that the key to having a relationship where this works is when both people in the relationship, the addict and the spouse, are both seeking professional help and not making the spouse the professional, right? Not making the spouse take the place of someone who doesn't of a trained professional, right? So that's where I see a lot of and I think that's what happens with the accountability partner, right? You're taking the space of someone who maybe understands it. That's why like a peer or what's it called, a sponsor, right, is so helpful for those kinds of men because they understand it. Whereas the woman, unless she struggled with a pornography addiction herself, doesn't fully 100% understand it. They're taking the place, they're stepping into a role that maybe isn't theirs to fill. So staying in the same role of a spouse, right? Rather than saying, okay, now I'm going to step in as a sponsor, or now I'm going to step in as your therapist, and now I'm going to step in as your counselor. I firmly believe that you stay in your own role. So, how would you handle this if it were any other issue? If you were having a problem at work, how would you talk about it? And that's how you deal with it. Does that make sense?
No, 100%. Yeah. You said something at the beginning that one of the reasons why women maybe don't talk to their husband about it, or probably they really don't talk to other people about it, is because of this shame, right? My husband's going to now be looked at as there's something wrong with him. Number one, as Christians, as believers, which I know is the vast majority of the women that you work with, we should all understand that we're all broken. There's not a single human being walking this planet here today that is perfect. Why do you feel that there's still such a big stigma in and around a pornography addiction?
That's a great question. I think it's way more internal than it is external. I think it has less to do with like the Christian church organization culture. I think it has way more to do with everybody individually. And this is something that I'm glad you brought this up because I think it has less to do with shame and more to do with humiliation. And I know you're videoing this, and I'm going to pull out my board that I just wrote this on yesterday because, anyways, anybody who's watching this can look at it. Okay. So this is the shame cycle, which I'm sure your men are familiar with, right? But the shame cycle is very similar. There's a flip side to shame, and it's humiliation. Shame is when you take your own actions and you make them mean something about you. That's usually what the men are in, the addict, right? They have this thing that they hate and they make it mean I'm a terrible person. I can't overcome this. What's wrong with me, right? All of that. The women on the flip side, I call it the humiliation cycle. It's the same cycle, only they're taking his actions. Humiliation is when you take another person's actions and make it mean something about you. So that's the cycle the women are in. So it's not necessarily that it's shame preventing them. And I think that it comes out that way, right? It comes out, I don't want anybody else to think negatively about my husband. But what's actually happening is that they think negatively about themselves because of what their husband is doing. They say, okay, he's doing something that's terrible. I feel humiliated. Why? Because I'm taking his actions and I'm making it mean something about me. He's watching pornography. That must mean there's something wrong with me. I'm not desirable enough as a wife. I'm not sexy enough. I'm not pretty enough. There must be something lacking in me. I'm not enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't go do this thing. That's humiliation. And that's the cycle the women are in. And it's very embarrassing or humiliating to acknowledge that within yourself, let alone to have other people see it as well. What if other people see this and they know my husband's going through it and they think the same thing? And they also think, what's wrong with her? Why can't she keep her man at home? Like that's the wife's job, right? The wife's job is to be sexy enough and desirable enough that their husband doesn't want anybody else, right? And that's I think what's underneath in a very subconscious way for these women, which is why it's more difficult to bring up because it brings up all of these fears, all these insecurities, all the things that are bringing about making you feel humiliated, which is all just your own thoughts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, no, 100%. And for those that are on the audio side, I want to kind of run you through what I can see here on this board. So at the top of the shame slash humiliation cycle, you have shame, which the men are feeling. It's Jolene did an incredible job. Then you have the humiliation. That then leads us to isolation, right? We feel shameful or we're humiliated about what's going on in our life, so we become isolated because we can't talk to anybody because that's just going to increase the shame and it's going to make all these feelings just kind of get to the next level. The isolation is going to lead to separation. Is that down there at the bottom? Okay, so yeah, so once you're isolating yourself, you're going to separate yourself from your relationships, from your community, from your fellowship groups, from your church groups, whatever. You're going to become to live in this separated state. That's going to lead you to a trigger now because you don't have anybody to help process things with you, process feelings, process emotions, process what's going on. So something beyond you is going to trigger you, which is going to lead you to act out again, and that's going to lead you back to the shame slash humiliation. So it becomes this cycle that every guy listening to this has probably been in before. And then for the females that are listening to this, I think Jolene did an incredible job of showing how closely linked these. I call them states of being. I don't think shame is a feeling. I think it becomes the state of being at which we live and see the world through. One of the best books that I've read has been Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. And he's got this it's a spectrum of it's a consciousness spectrum, and it's like at the highest top is the enlightenment, followed by joy, peace, courage. These are all states that we can operate and kind of navigate the world through. At the bottom of the spectrum, you have death. Right above death is shame. So when you're living in shame, I see that as like you're one step above death. You're never going to create any joy, any happiness. You're living far below what you're meant to live. So powerful demonstration there.
Well, it's I love that you said that because that's really the difference between like guilt and shame, right? Shame is when there's an identity factor to it, which is the same with humiliation. It's more than embarrassment. There's like guilt, which is just you feel and I did this thing and I feel bad about it. Shame is when you then make it part of your identity. And humiliation is the same. Embarrassment is like, oh, there's this thing, I'm a little like uncomfortable that it happened. Humiliation is when you then have this identity factor. Right? It's where I take someone else's behavior. So in this case, my husband, and I say, he did this thing and I feel humiliated. It's because of me. There's something wrong with me as a wife. I take my identity. And the key to really getting out of shame and humiliation is separating, understanding that your identity is separate from your actions or from the action of the person. So when you're feeling shame, when you're in that identity, it's the key to getting out of it is understanding who you are is not what you've done, that you are more than just your worst mistakes, that you are more than just the worst things that you've done, which is something I teach my women too. And that it's really crucial for them to start moving forward is they have to learn how to separate their husband from what he's doing. Like, it's very common for these women to be putting him all wrapped up, and they start to question, "Do I really know who he is? He's not who I thought he was," and they start to wrap up who he is with what he's doing, which is exactly what he's doing, right? In the shame When you're in the shame cycle, you're doing the same thing, wrapping up who you are with what you've done, but the women do that, and so as I'm teaching them the shame cycle, and what that means, that's when we are able to start breaking them into two different things. There's your husband, and then there's what he's choosing to do. And they're two different things. And when you can separate that, that's when you can start to separate, okay, maybe his actions don't mean anything about him, and maybe they also don't mean anything about me. And that's the key to getting out of humiliation is understanding who you are is completely independent from the relationship that you have with other people. I'm not who I am because of my role as a wife or my role as a mom, right? I bring who I am into those roles. Does that make sense?
100%. I love how you kind of decipher between the guilt and shame. I say it all the time. I think guilt is when you see yourself as a good person that did something bad. Shame is I'm a bad person because of what I did. So you talked about, and I think that this can get super tactical, both for the women that hopefully we have here with us today that can process and work through the humiliation cycle, but also for the men that are maybe struggling through the shame cycle. Because I'm assuming that maybe some of the steps are going to be the same. You talked about kind of detaching the identity from the behavior. Is there tactical like steps that you walk women through, or like how do you go about doing that? It sounds great, right? I'm going to detach myself from my identity versus what I did. What does that process actually look like?
That's a great question. So this is something, yes, I teach in with my women, this is what I do in my coaching program. The number one step is awareness. First of all, you have to become aware of what it is that you already believe, aware of the thoughts that you already are connecting, which the pornography, if we're talking for your men, is just an indication that there's a connection. Like the shame is just an indication that there's a connection in your brain between what you're doing and who you think you are, right? So the awareness level is where we start. Oh, okay. So the shame is just kind of a red flag. It's just a clue. It's like, oh, okay. So obviously there's some kind of thought or belief that I'm connecting. I'm making this mean something about me. So that's the awareness. What is it that I believe about myself? Step number one. Step number two is learning how to do that without judgment. So I call it acceptance, right? Step number one is awareness. Step number two is acceptance, right? It's accepting what it is that we believe because a lot of times those beliefs are super uncomfortable. We're very uncomfortable thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I believed that I'm a terrible person. I didn't even realize that I believed that I'm not a good enough wife. I didn't even realize that I believed that I don't deserve to be in a relationship with someone because of what I do. Whatever it is the belief is that we become aware of, usually with the help of a coach, right? It's very uncomfortable. And so learning how to accept without judgment is a huge step because usually what we want to do is then we want to add layers of emotion on top of it that then complicate it and make it harder to overcome. We feel guilty, right? Like, oh my gosh, I think I'm a terrible wife. I shouldn't think that. I'm a Christian. I should know that my worth is more than this. I shouldn't apply meaning to this, right? And then we judge ourselves for the thing we just became aware of, which just adds more layers of shame and guilt and humiliation that then we have to work through. So we can just let all of that go. It's all unnecessary. We can just accept without judgment. And that's step number two. Does this make sense? You're following me?
Hmm. Yes, I
Okay.
am.
Okay. Step number three is then you have to process the emotion. And that is not what we think it is. Usually people think they're processing emotion if they yell or if they cry. Processing emotion is a literal physical experience. People who meditate have a little bit more understanding of this, right? This is what coaches do. They help you feel and process like all those feelings that you talk about on Instagram, all those videos that you talk about on your podcast are like, you have to get connected and accept the loneliness inside of you. You have to connect with the emotions that you don't want to feel. You have to actually learn what shame feels like. You have to allow yourself to process it because that's how you let it go. Most of us resist what it is that we're feeling, or we try to distract ourselves from it, which is what pornography is. It's a distraction from whatever emotion it is that we're feeling. We're, as humans, pretty terrible at feeling our feelings. Kids are great at it. Adults, we get really bad, so bad. And men are even worse because men are, societally, right? We're trained to be like, men don't feel feelings, boys don't cry. Like men are taught to resist their emotions. Okay. So you have to reverse that and start learning how to process it in a healthy way. And that way you can let it go. And that's step number three. Step number four is when then you get to start to decide on purpose, okay, I have this belief about myself that I don't like, and it's producing all of these emotions. I'm accepting that, I'm processing through those, but what do I do next? What if I could think something else about myself? What do I want to believe? And then you get to choose it. You can choose to believe anything you want about yourself. You can choose to believe that you can overcome pornography. When was the last time you chose that, right? When was the last time you sat down and said, "You know what? What if I could do this? What if it's possible that I could overcome this pornography addiction? What if it's possible that I don't have to let this define me for the rest of my life? What if it's possible for me to accept and believe and actually step into this identity that I am someone who conquers addiction? That it's not once an addict, always an addict, that I am even bigger than that." Right? You get to choose to believe anything you want, and that's when you get to choose it. And then the last step is when you retrain your brain because your brain has all of these neural pathways that go from point A to point B. They're like, oh, I know what to do. As soon as I watch pornography, point A, point B is shame. And they're really good. Your brain is like super fast at going from point A to point B. So when you're retraining your brain, you are literally recreating and redesigning the neural pathways in your brain. And it takes intentional work, but it's totally possible. And I think that's the most fun is when you get to choose something new to believe about yourself. It's like, okay, what if I don't have to identify myself by my husband's actions? What if I could choose to believe anything about myself? What would I choose? Would I choose to believe that I'm enough? Would I choose to believe that I'm desirable and sexy even if my husband still watches porn? If I get to choose to believe anything I want about myself, what would I choose? And then I'm going to retrain my brain in order to do it.
I love that so much. Those 5 steps, guys: awareness, acceptance, the processing of emotions, the deciding on purpose. God, that number 4 is so big. I want to stay on that one here for a minute. And then the retraining of your brain. I have my belief that I think number 4 is where most men struggle in actually deciding, because there's something about, maybe it's the struggle, maybe it's they haven't fully embraced this new identity, whatever it is. It's like the decision to live 100% porn for your life is where I see most men getting caught up. And the women that you work with, which one of the 5 do you experience they have the most difficulty with?
Number
And why
three.
is that number
Number
3?
3, processing the emotion. And this is why and this is so key because it's different than just thinking really nice thoughts. It's different than just having a nice mantra that you write on your mirror, is you can't only switch your brain to a different thought. It's not going to work because your brain is smart enough to know that it's being lied to, right? So for my women, I always give the example of like, okay, if you hate your body, right? And then it's like, I can't just write on my mirror, like, I look amazing or I love my body, because you can, even if you tell yourself that 50 times a day, your brain's going to be like, yeah, except that you have some cellulite and except that you really haven't lost that last 15 pounds from your last baby. And when was the last time you put on a pair of leggings that, didn't make you look like a whale, right? Like your brain will offer you all of these different thoughts if it doesn't resonate. So this is why the really the key to moving forward is processing that emotion, processing the shame that you've kept inside you, processing the humiliation that you've kept inside you, and letting it go. I mean, this is why it's called emotional baggage, right? Is because we have all of this emotional baggage from whatever it is, and we're just kind of carrying it around throughout all of our life, and it's time to let it go. But the only way to let it go, the only way to work past it is to work through it. And so many women, it's so difficult for, and just anybody in general, it's difficult to work through these emotions, especially when you make them mean something about you. How difficult is it to feel shame when the shame itself tells you that that's who you are? Right? It's very difficult to accept and experience an emotion independent of who you are. And that's a huge key, is saying, I can feel worthlessness and not make it mean that I am worthless. I can feel loneliness and not make it mean that I am alone. It's learning how to separate yourself, your identity, from the emotion that you feel so that you can experience it and feel it and process it and let it go and then continue to move on. Does that make sense?
100%. How do you help women in understanding that emotions are here to teach us a lesson? I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in these, 4 years of healing and recovery that I've been on is like, there's going to be days that I don't feel great. There's going to be days I'm going to be sad. There's going to be days that I'm not motivated. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to feel alone. I'm going to feel all these emotions both on the negative and on the positive. And it's that polarity, in my opinion, that actually creates the experience that we're all on. Without sadness, you can never experience joy. Without loneliness, you can never experience what it's like to be with others, that intimacy that you feel when you're connected with others. We know without darkness, you can't have light. Without white, you can't have black. It's like we need the polarity of these emotions. How do you help women understand that in this process? Hey, when you're going through this, not every day is going to be great. You're not going to be happy. There's going to be points where your emotions take you back to some of the previous states that you were in. So how do you help them in understanding this?
I think you hit on it, is that I do teach that it's 50-50. Life is 50-50. Every experience that you have is going to have positive and negative in it. And it's accepting that that's what life is. So many of us strive to create a net positive in a bad way, right? We resist the negative in our life. Like take pornography, for example. We resist the shame, resist the loneliness, whatever emotion it is that we're feeling that's negative, and we try to mask it with something positive, which is pornography. It gives you that temporary uplift, that temporary positive rush, right? That's the immediate gratification. And that's what our brain wants. Our brain wants something we think that we're supposed to have. Life is supposed to be all positive, and it's not. Life is supposed to be 50-50. And that's the beautiful part of it, is accepting it. And part of that with my ladies is understanding, and this is very hard for them, is that you don't the way that you tell your story matters. Women, in order to validate how they're feeling, especially as the wife of a porn addict, tend to dramatize their story and make it seem more negative In fact, they resist processing the negative emotion and letting it go and experience something more positive because of what they think it means, right? They, for example, they think if I actually process all of the hurt and the pain and I forgive and I move past it, then it means that everything was okay or that I overreacted or that didn't hurt. They resist letting go of the negative. This is what we do as humans. It makes no sense. We resist letting go of the negative. We hold on to it because it validates the story. It validates my story as a victim. It validates my story as he did something wrong. I'm just the innocent bystander here. I'm trying so hard to change my life and I'm the one doing all the work. And even if he's putting in work, it's like, no, he hurt me. And I need to keep that pain with me in order to validate my story because I did feel pain. But it's like, no, you can just let it all go. It's totally fine. What if the pain that you're feeling isn't any worse than anybody else's pain? What if it's just all part of the 50-50? What if this is exactly what you signed up for? I've had so many clients that say this. I never would have married him if I knew ahead of time. Or I would never do this to him. I didn't sign up for this. And I'm like, what if this is exactly what you signed up for? Because you signed up for life. Life is 50-50. Whether it's a pornography problem or it's something else like a child getting sick or heaven forbid your house burns down, it's going to be 50-50. This is just bringing it up in a different way. And it's our opportunity to look at it.
Why is the line drawn in the sand with pornography addiction? Here's my question. So to hear that a woman would say, I never signed up for this. I wouldn't have married if I would have known this part about him. I can't imagine that if somewhere in the marriage a man starts struggling with alcohol, drugs, gambling, any of these other addictions, that those same statements would be made. She would link up arms with him and say, I signed up for this because I signed up for life with you. And this is a part of what I signed up for. We're going to get through this together. Why is all those other behavior addictions over here in this bucket and pornography seems to be isolated? Like it's almost something that is more grandiose, like it's kind of on a pedestal.
Yes. I love that you brought this up because really the key is again the humiliation. It's they make it mean something about themselves because pornography is sexual. There's that sexual component to it. The wife, who is the sexual partner for the addict, then makes the addiction mean something about her, right? There's a natural connection that their brain makes that we work really hard, and that's what I teach them how to do is how to break up with it and how to disconnect it. And I bring up alcoholism and gambling all the time. I'm like, look, if your husband was like addicted to online shopping, that's the same thing. It's the same understanding of they're trying to avoid something inside of themselves and this is simply the outlet that they've chosen. But for the wife, there is a direct correlation to themselves physically, to who they are as a sexual partner, their desirability as a woman. And that's the humiliation. They're taking some his actions and making it mean something about them. Does that make sense?
100%. So I guess the question here is, I mean, this is a big one, right? And I think you and I can just kind of throw some ideas around. But how do we change the stigma around this, right? You talked at the beginning, somewhere around 50-60% of Christian men are addicted with this. So it shouldn't, it's like it's not like that there's like this small isolated group. It's like damn near half the people in the church are struggling with this. And you talk to any guy, this is what changed my life back in 2019 because I didn't had a lot of conversations around it, like never up until February 2019. But then through the first conversation, I started to live some of that shame and I felt so light, so free. I started to talk to every single guy that I looked up to and entrusted in. And they said, I know, Frank, I've dealt with it too. So if the women out there that are hearing this, and I'm sure you help them understand this, it's a problem the vast majority of men are struggling with. And even the ones that aren't yet admitting it, they're just not really looking at the problem for what it is. So how do we change some of this acceptance? I mean, I know it's like more of a bigger societal issue here, but how do we change the stigma in and around it?
My brain is trying to go like big solve world problems here. But I think and that's what you and I are doing, right? We're talking about it very publicly, which is not what everybody wants to do, and that's fine. I think the number one place that you start is with yourself, is being honest. And I think honesty and humility are really the keys to starting to change and shift things within yourself and your relationships. It's saying, you know what, I'm humble enough to say, yeah, I've struggled with this, and I don't have to make it mean something about me. It doesn't mean I'm a terrible person. It doesn't mean I'm a fraud if I struggle with this and I go to church. And opening it up to maybe your wife or maybe you're someone you trust and starting to have more conversations about it. As a parent, I have 5 kids, and as a parent, This is something I talk a lot about with my kids. We talk about pornography, we talk about your emotions and how you can just feel them rather than trying to turn to something else to make you feel better. And I think as I'm saying this, I really think the key is understanding that you don't have to feel better, that it's okay to feel all the things, that it's okay to accept life as 50-50. I think one of the things that we struggle with, especially as Christians, is like, we're supposed to have an incredible positive experience. We're so, we have the light of Christ and we're supposed to be examples of him and we're supposed to have joy. And the scriptures talk about that. They're like, if you want to have a joyful life, then follow the commandments, like do the things God's asked you to do. And that's what leads to a great life. And then if you still struggle with depression or anxiety or whatever it is, you feel like you must be doing something wrong. And then there comes the shame. And then you try to just make yourself feel better with whatever comes next: food, pornography, drugs, gambling, right? It could just be overworking or over exercising, whatever it is that you're doing to try to make your life feel better, to try to solve externally for what's going on internally, then that's when we're going to just perpetuate it. But when we understand that life is beautiful and what makes life positive is the negative, then we don't have to avoid it.
Yeah, no. Correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm not a theologian. I've been saved here since 2018, so I'm a baby, Christian, kind of stumbling through my walk every single day. But I don't think being a Christian, and maybe this is the message that is being taught, and this is where some of the misalignment comes from. I don't think it's meant to be a great life. I think we can experience joy and positivity, but I think once we accept Christ into our life, we are called that it's going to be difficult. I think that's what pick across daily. It's you got to endure the struggle, you got to endure the challenge, and in doing so you get on the other side of some of these struggles and challenges. And that's where pure bliss comes from. And that's where joy and happiness. I don't think being a Christian means you're going to live a great life all the time. I think it's embracing the difficulty and challenge and say, hey, Jesus died for all of this. He sent this Holy Spirit down to us. Now we have this living inside of us, which means through Christ, we can conquer anything that's presented in front of us. So I don't know if that's what you were saying, but I do think the being a Christian is going to be an easy, great life message does get taught a lot. And I don't think that's what the scripture is actually trying to tell us.
I agree. I completely agree. I think this is actually just my own personal opinion. I think that this is one of the reasons why I feel like Satan, I feel like he works so hard to um, catch all of us in things that destroy our agency, destroy our ability to choose, right? So things like addiction are pushed hard against us and for that reason. And then I think that that shame that comes with that, I really think that that's Satan working against us with trying to undermine our identity as Christians, as children of Christ, as children of God, right? As more, we believe that we are more than that. Our identity is deeper, it's more profound. It's not just that we're human, it's that we have a savior and a God, and that's our identity. And I think that that is really the root. I think that's again why Satan pushes something that destroys your ability to choose, no matter what that looks like. I think that's why that's pushed so much. And again, why that is so hard to come out of is because of what we then make it mean about ourselves and who we are.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you talked about your kids and how you're kind of bringing it into the household. How old are your five?
My oldest is 11 and my youngest is 5.
Okay. And then all mixed up in between there. Can you kind of share how you're having these conversations? I mean, is it something you're having with the 5-year-old? Is that the same conversation that you're having with the 11-year-old? I think this part right here is going to be incredibly valuable for the men, fathers out there, for the women, mothers out there, for the expected parents, for the people that want to have children in their life, for myself, how to navigate this as well down the future. So, yeah, walk us through kind of what those conversations are looking like, and are they different depending upon the age?
They are for sure different depending on the age. There's great resources. One of the best is Defend Young Minds. They have great resources for kids on how to talk to your kids about pornography. And they have a couple of books, which we own, which are Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. So they have a Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior, which is like, it basically teaches what pornography is and what to do. And this is really the key: what to do when you see it, which is you can teach kids what pornography is in an age appropriate way, but teaching them what they should do, an actionable step, is really the key, I think, to getting to making sure they never enter the shame cycle, right? Is saying, oh, I saw pornography, now what do I do? oh, maybe that means that I'm bad. I shouldn't have looked at it. Maybe they even liked it and they don't understand that, right? So it's talking about what to do next. And so there's those books which are so good. So we just have those like on our bookshelf and we just read them all the time. And my kids will just pull them out and they'll say, "Hey, I want to read this one." Great. And we've read it before, or we'll have intentional little like um family lessons where I'm like, "Hey, we're going to read this book." Right. And we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about what pornography is and when you see it. Now, of course, I'm not showing them examples of pornography, and my 5-year-old has a very different understanding of what a bad picture might be versus my 11-year-old, and and that's all okay. We just sit down and we talk about it. My kids are homeschooled, and we don't have social media. My kids don't have internet, but if you do have kids who are on YouTube, or if they have social media, this is going to be something that is huge. There's another resource, protect young there's defend young minds and protect young eyes.
Eyes. Yeah, we had Chris on the show. Yeah.
Yes, he's so good, and he has so many good tips on how to um navigate technology with children. So those are really, really good resources. But I think I mean, granted, I do this as a job. My kids know what I do. They have a very limited understanding, really, concept of what that means. But we've talked to them about how their dad struggled with this, and the key, I think it scares a lot of parents. They don't want their kids to know. I've coached many women who they don't want they're working through it with their spouse, but they don't want to talk to their kids about it. And again, it brings up the same thing. It's like I don't want them to feel differently about their dad. But again, if you're willing to experience the 50-50, maybe it's exactly what your kid needs to hear, especially if you have a son, because the average age of exposure to pornography is between 8 and 11. So chances are, if your husband's dealing with this, if your kids go to school, if they're on social media, if they have a friend that has a phone, they're going to get exposed to this. And so getting ahead of the conversation and saying, "Hey, you can talk to me about this. I'm willing to talk to you about it. We can have an open dialogue about this," is going to be something that maybe helps them when they see it and they say, "Oh, I remember my mom talked to me about this. Maybe I could talk to her."
It's that initial planting of the seed and getting in front of it. I don't have children, so I navigate this conversation very lightly in terms of, hey, this is what my perspective is from a professional working in the space. I don't have that real world experience that you do. Big fan of both the defend young minds and protect young eyes. I mentioned we had Chris on the show, but I think the biggest thing there is you got to get in front of it because I try to get this message across. It doesn't matter who your child is. Like they could be the all-star straight A's. That was me. I had straight A's. I was winning all the sports trophies. I was a great student. Like letters coming home from all the teachers. Frank is going to go on to do big, amazing things in this world. Still caught me. And I try to just make parents understand in the world that we live in today, 24-hour access connected to everybody all around us. There will come a time in your young child's mind when their eyes see something that their young brain is not developed to handle. And that's why the conversation, the books, this is what it is, this is what it isn't, this is who you go to, equipping them with an understanding. Because as a boy, if you haven't been talked about what this is going to feel like, when you see it, it's going to make you feel all squishy inside. Like that's what it does to a young boy. It's like you see a female body in the way that you've never seen it before. It makes you feel gushy inside. Then it implants a level of curiosity. Well, why is that body different than every other body that I've been to? Let me go back and see it again. Let me go back and let me go back. Now you're creating the cycle. And then they're shameful because who would I talk to? So you're literally teaching your children the shame cycle from a very young age if you're not equipping them with the tools. So I love all that. Thank you for sharing that.
I love it. I love it. I want to hit that real quick. Is like there's something to understand that for these men, for all your men listening, men folk, listen up. This is for you. It is okay what that you like what you see. You are designed like the porn industry knows what they're doing. They know their job really well and they are doing exactly what they want to do. They are presenting something to you that is very appealing. And it is okay that your body finds it appealing. That is okay that you have a physical response. The shame comes when we say that I shouldn't feel that way, right? There's something wrong with me for even liking that. It's designed to make you like it. Now, does that mean that you should pursue it? No. Does that mean that I think that that's okay in a marriage or in a healthy relationship? No. But understanding that there's nothing wrong with you for responding to what you have seen, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is important because then we again, if you can even prevent, it's very difficult to get out of the shame cycle because you have to break out of that belief that it has anything to do with who you are. But if you can't even prevent yourself from getting into the shame cycle, then that is where you can start. You'll just start light years ahead if you can even just avoid getting into it altogether.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's like it's not like why did I end up here? It's like how did you not end up here sooner? You know, it's like Lay's potato chips are genetically engineered to make you want more of them once you have the first one. Like that's why the whole bet you can't eat just one. Like that's true. Like because they knew based upon flavoring and certain things and things that they were putting in the food and they had all these geneticists kind of behind the scenes working on this. Well, these porn companies have psychologists, neuroscientists. They understand how one video is going to trigger your brain this way. It's going to lead you to wanting the second one and the third one. The advertisements are all placed for a specific reason. The production in and of itself is designed in a specific way. So you're fighting against AI technology and people that are way smarter than you that understand the male brain. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, and it leads me to a question I wanted to ask you. Hopefully, I don't get in trouble with this one, but we know that the male and female brain is radically different. How our brain responds visually is kind of the same way that a woman's brain is going to respond visually, kind of to literature. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lemke. So Anna's the head of addiction at Stanford Research. 25 plus years, both as a clinician, working as a psychiatrist in addiction recovery, sex, gambling, pornography, all these. And then she's also done a lot of research there as well. Well, she opens up her book, Dopamine Nation, where she's talking about how the brain gets addicted, the process to overcoming this, dopamine detox. She opens it up with her own personal story of struggling with a Twilight addiction. So, female pornography is kind of the erotica type novels. The women that you're working with, do you bring that up at all with them?
I definitely do talk about it with them because a lot of them will say, like, I don't understand why he finds this so appealing, or, it's obviously not real. And I do bring this up and I say, look, you women tend to go to different things. Men tend to go to pornography, very visual, right? Women tend to go to food or online shopping. There are certain things that we go to avoid how we feel. And yes, for women, it tends to be literature. Women tend to, if they are going to turn to pornography, it's much more culturally acceptable for a woman to pick up an erotic novel than it is for them to go watch porn, where it's the reverse for men, right? For men, it's very socially acceptable to watch porn on your laptop, on your phone, whatever. And it's less common for them to go into erotica in literature. Like if you go into a bookstore, there is an entire section for romance, and it's like half naked people on the covers, and it's all designed to be in this envelope of love stories. And it's got all the scenes in it that are just written down instead of watched on a film.
Yeah. Have you ever had a woman then where you begin to talk about this with them and it then clicks in their head, oh, now I understand why he is struggling?
Not necessarily for the literature itself. I once they understand what is driving the pornography, the desire for the urge, right? Once they understand that it's a feeling that he doesn't want to feel, and then he is going toward that to avoid it, right? Loneliness, worthlessness, boredom, curiosity, right? And then I describe it in a different way. What do you do when you're bored, right? You scroll social media, right? Or if I say things like, okay, is there something in your life that you feel like you do? And it's like, well, I drink too much Diet Coke. Right? And it's like, okay, well, whatever it is that they do, when they're able to click with, oh, there is something in my life that I'm doing in order to avoid my feeling, maybe that's just what he's doing. That's when it clicks.
Yeah, no, that's great. Jolene, this has been incredible. Like understanding the mindset, why we're struggling with some of these things, the shame, humiliation cycle. That was powerful, guys. Make sure to go back and re-listen. Watch that if you're not on the YouTube. Make sure to head over to YouTube to catch that real visual example there. Last bit here, and then we'll drive the conversation to a close here. Obviously, the vast majority of the people that hear this are going to be men. A large amount of them are probably struggling in their life. What is one piece of advice from you, a woman, somebody that works with women in this space, that a man can leave today's conversation with and begin to take action? Whether it's having the conversation, working with somebody, just a clear call to action for the men out there that are struggling and aren't yet doing anything about it.
The first thing that I would say, and I actually went back and watched our last conversation, and what I said last time was that women struggle more with you being dishonest with withholding the information than they actually do with the pornography. So I'm going to reiterate that because that is the number one thing. It was me for 100% across the board. Every woman I've ever talked to, it's harder for them that you didn't say anything than the pornography itself. They feel like the pornography they can work through, they can get through this, that we can do. It's harder when you're not talking to them about it, when you haven't said anything. And I understand all the reasons why you're not. It's hard. It's hard to even admit to yourself, let alone admit to the one person that you love and you know that they're going to feel bad about it. Right. And so I get that. So, but I do want to say that. But as I was thinking about this ahead of time, I think what I would say is the one number one thing that you can do is stop doing this by yourself. And that means, to me, hiring a professional. You will never regret getting someone to help you, especially someone who's been through this before. You will only regret not having done it sooner because the longer what happened, like imagine 5 years from now, if you're still in the same place, now you've had 5 more years of more guilt, more shame, more humiliation, more tension in your marriage, more distrust, more hiding, more lies. And that just breeds so much more. There's a ripple effect to everything that we do, especially when you're in a relationship. So if you are struggling with this, then I would encourage you to reach out to Frank. Go get help. Join his today, right now, before you even end this podcast. Press pause, go join it because there is something so powerful in saying, I am taking action. Because what's happening right now is in your brain, you feel like the victim. You feel like you have no choice, you have no control. And as long as you stay in that mindset, then that is what's going to perpetuate, and you will have no control and you will have no choice. And eventually you will end up living a life that you feel like it's not your own because you are at the effect of an addiction. But when you say, no, I am taking action and I'm going to start today, that starts to trigger something in your brain that's super powerful. It starts to say, no, I can change things. I can reverse this. I can start, and it might look like today just signing up, and tomorrow it might look like relapsing and then calling Frank. I don't know what your program looks like, but it might look like watching a module. It might look like texting my sponsor. It might look like something else. But it's taking that action and being in control that starts to train your brain and say, I do have control over what happens next. This is my life. I get to choose. And that is what I would say is take action. And for your wife, I would, if you are talking to her or you do talk to her, encourage her to do the same. Because the longer you stay a victim, the longer she stays a victim to your behavior. Again, the more this perpetuates, the more the ripple effect happens. And I would love to help her. If it's me, I would absolutely love it. But again, taking action is starting to take control and get out of that victim mindset. And that's the most powerful thing you could do.
100%. No, I think the first path to embracing the new identity is to begin to do the things that the person that has a new identity does, you know? So incredibly, incredibly powerful. And guys, we'll plug down all of Jolene's sites, her social media, the porn addict's wife, all that stuff. The podcast will get down there in the show notes there below. Obviously, if you're a guy and your wife is struggling with some things, reach out, have a conversation. I'm sure, assuming you offer some type of free consultation calls as well. So we get all that plugged down there in the show notes. Last bit, tell us about this. You got a class coming up in April. Tell us
I
tell us
do.
about this class.
I have a class and it's called How to Set Boundaries. And it is a 4-day workshop that I'm doing. It's $19. You can come coach with me. It's like 90 minutes a day. So it's April 17th to the 20th. And it's just found on my website. You can go to jolenewinn.com. There's a whole tab on it called Coach Week, and that's all in there, all the details. And what we're going to do that week is learn what a healthy boundary is, because most of us do it very wrong. Okay. What a healthy boundary is, how to set it, and do so in a way that makes you feel safe, even if your husband is still struggling with pornography. So, gentlemen, if you tell your wife and you're like, okay, here's a good resource for you, here's how we start moving forward. How do we start working on this together? How do we start having conversations about this without one of us breaking down or getting really mad or whatever it is? How do we do this in a healthy way? This is a really good class to start with.
Incredible. Jolene Wynn, thank you so much for what you do, your work, your spirit, your mission, purpose, everything. I just want to acknowledge you because there's not a lot of women out there leading the charge like you are. As I've been in this space long enough now, you see a lot of guys like myself beginning to pop up, which I'm a huge fan of. The more men we have fighting this battle, the better. I don't see a lot of women out there attacking it. So I want to acknowledge you because I think what you're doing is incredibly needed. And I'm so grateful to have you back here on the show today. I think we did an incredible job of really giving some deep insight into what the woman's going through, but then some real actionable tools for both the men and women out there. So, Jolene, guys, thank you. Thank you once again. Guys, if you got value out of this, make sure to connect with Jolene. More importantly, guys, we ask you here every single week. We've really seen some tremendous growth over these last couple of months with the show here, and it's all because of you guys, for you guys sharing this, for you guys leaving those reviews. So if you haven't done so yet, take a moment after today, leave us a 5-star rating and written review right there on Apple, Spotify, wherever you are consuming. But more importantly, if there's somebody going through your life, maybe there's a guy that's struggling with pornography addiction, maybe there's a woman in your life that is struggling with her husband's pornography addiction, do us a favor and do them the blessing by sharing today's conversation with them. But for Jolene Winn, your host, Frank Rich here. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.